what would policy coherence look like? It wouldn't look like a national health strategy developed without reference to the SDG goal for health or poverty, which was what was developed last year in New Zealand after these goals were accepted. And what it would not look like is thinking that this agenda only applied to developing countries like the Millennium Development Goals, because this applies to all countries. The state of New Zealand has promised to protect and promote the political and civil, economic and social cultural rights of everyone in New Zealand. That's in the international human rights obligations. And the state has promised to leave no one behind in implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in New Zealand. The state has promised to collect disaggregated data on SDG indicators so that progress can be measured. The state has promised to report on progress. These are not binding international legal obligations unless they are also international human rights obligations. There is a relationship that I've talked about between the two. I'll put that back up for a second. So how would all this fit together? Well, what we've done is adapt a framework which, somewhat unbelievably, I first saw presented by the Commonwealth Games Federation CEO to explain the vision and the purpose of the Commonwealth Games, and our model is adapted to acknowledge Treasury's higher living standards framework. And I'm told I'm not allowed to move over there and point around, so I won't. But basically, we set high standards for ourselves in New Zealand on human rights. The Minister of Justice rightly observed in the New Zealand Human Rights Council in its recent review that she came from a country where there was real concern when we dropped from 2 to 4 in Transparency International's corruption index. She was so frank about the appalling level of family and sexual violence in New Zealand that one of the committee members was moved to say he had a totally new perspective on New Zealand. So when we go to these goals, and we won't go into the detail of them tonight, SDG Goal 16 and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights underpin peacemaking in New Zealand, so the bottom of that diagram. They provide the violence reduction targets and indicators in SDG Goal 16 provide the platform to strengthen existing and ongoing interventions in New Zealand. And there is some fairly amazing work going on by ministers and ministries at the moment to come up with better solutions than we've had. SDG Goal 6.1 is to, by 2030, significantly reduce all forms of violence and related death rates everywhere. SDG Goal 16.2 is to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking and all forms of violence against and torture of children. The global SDG indicators related to these goals will also provide the basis for SDG national indicators to be developed so progress against the goals can be measured. The SDG goals most relevant to our social and economic rights challenges are the SDG goals 1.4, access to base services, 1.2, reduce poverty by half as poverty is defined nationally. 3.8, access to health. 4.1, 4.2 and 4A, access to education. 10.2, social inclusion. And 11.1, adequate housing. SDG 1.2 is to reduce poverty as nationally defined by half by 2030. That is going to require New Zealand to agree on a national definition of poverty, something we haven't done yet, and to plan to reduce poverty is so defined by half of 2015 levels by 2030. And to report on that in the disaggregated population groups that the SDGs require, so disabled people, Indigenous people, ethnic minorities, women and girls, and so on. So we can see which part of the country is being left behind as we move forward. Now when the governments of the world agreed this at the United Nations, Malala Yousafzai, who you may remember as the young Pakistani girl who was shot in campaigns around the world for the right to education, stood up from the balcony of the United Nations and said, "Promise us that you will meet your commitments." It's a challenge well made. It's a challenge for national human rights institutions as well. We need to embrace the changes we will need to make in the way we work with data if we are able to prove to Malala and the people of New Zealand that our state has or has not met its promises. We have a great platform of capability to work on. It is, however, unlikely that there will be a lot more money. So we will have to remember what the New Zealander who split the atom said. We did not have the money, so we had to think. And we've been doing that. So I want to briefly explain how we have been integrating reporting and monitoring of the Universal Periodic Review and treaty bodies into our National Plan of Action for Human Rights, and how the human rights indicators for the SDG agenda will be critical to that. Just to go back and explain, the Universal Periodic Review is the only human rights review that is a state-on-state review. Occurs once every 4.5 years. NGOs and human rights institutions and others lobby states as to what they think the recommendations to New Zealand should be. The states make the recommendations, New Zealand accepts them or doesn't accept them. And we've now completed 2 cycles of that process. Between now and 2030, there will be 3 more UPR reviews of New Zealand by the UN Human Rights Council, and many treaty body reviews as well, and now reviews of the SDGs by the UN Social and Economic Committee. In each of those cycles, we want to improve the use of data to prove to New Zealanders and to Malala and the rest of the world that New Zealand is or is not meeting its human rights commitments. We anticipate a lot less words and a lot more data and trend lines. New Zealand and New Zealand's NHRI meet all its UN treaty body and UPR reporting requirements. This is unusual amongst states. Both the state and the NHRI and New Zealand NGOs travel thousands of miles to Geneva for these processes. We're now able to use web and other things, but getting better. New Zealand ministers attend in person, which is also unusual. New Zealand civil society organisations take their shadow reporting responsibilities seriously. Over 200 NGOs participated in the last UPR process. We want more involved in the 3rd cycle. We take advantage of other opportunities to participate in the UN system in Geneva and New York, but we only participate in these processes in order to make an improvement back in New Zealand to our human rights realisation. So at the start of the planning for the 2nd cycle, we were given the okay to develop a 2nd New Zealand National Action Plan for Human Rights. Under our law, the NHRI is responsible for the preparation of the National Action Plan for Human Rights. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. We're the only one, I think, in the Commonwealth is in that position. One of the disadvantages is if the planning process is divorced from the government planning process, nothing will happen. So you've got to get the government to commit. So basically we did that by developing what's now a web tool that you can go to, and you can literally see all the recommendations that were made, and then you can see the action plans that are being driven off that to meet each of those things, and we're now adding in other stuff. So in 2013, when we first began that process, we familiarised ourselves with the OHCHR's human rights indicators work, and we were planning to use those indicators in the National Plan of Action. However, a result of the good work that I've mentioned by the Danish Institute on the SDG agenda and the work of the Asia-Pacific Forum of National Human Rights Institutions and the Centre of Economic and Social Rights on economic and social rights monitoring, we decided to wait until the SDG indicators were developed and then insert them in the National Plan of Action. We also started to develop relationships with Treasury and our national statistics organisation, Statistics New Zealand, in preparation for the finalisation of the SDG indicators at an international level so that we could play a role at a national level. Today we have an action plan that makes very clear what work is exactly going on. It's got traffic lights on it, it's pretty straightforward. The plan is web-based so we can insert new actions as they develop, remove things when they're not being done. We've shared it with the EU states. They now know how to work it to check what's going on with their recommendations. The Australian Attorney General has asked for a copy so they can see what they can do. States that have done that, and NGOs also are finding it useful, both international NGOs and New Zealand NGOs, to see what's going on. We're also closely monitoring a number of projects that the state has underway that may be highly relevant to our human rights work and to the SDG agenda. These include the Open Government Partnership Action Plan, the Treasury Living Standards work that I've mentioned, and the work of the Data Futures Forum, perhaps most significantly. We're hopeful that the forum's focus on health data and social investment will be useful for our human rights promotion and protection work. We've also asked the government to consider a more harmonised and streamlined approach to the UPR and treaty body reporting in the hope we hope will be better for civil society and better for the bodies and states monitoring New Zealand's human rights performance. That work is also underway, and we've started a collective impact initiative with the Treasury, supported by the Commission, MFAT, Statistics, Social Development and UNICEF, to develop national ASPG human rights indicators in the areas of unequal realisation of rights in New Zealand. We will reach out to wider civil society soon. I just want to conclude with an observation about democracy in New Zealand. We are by any measure a democratic country, but that does not mean we do not have democratic deficits in New Zealand. We agree with the Productivities Commission's point that there is a democratic deficit in local government that sees poor people paying the cost of inadequate housing in New Zealand. We also believe that if children could vote in New Zealand, child poverty would have a higher priority in New Zealand, and reducing even a little bit the age of voting might be of assistance. Disabled people have long used the phrase "nothing about us without us." Those badly affected by the Canterbury earthquake sequence picked it up as well. One of the most hopeful things happening in New Zealand at the moment is a growing understanding that the people with the issue are likely to have the best solution for the issue. And perhaps the best example is how the Canterbury health system has been redesigned in a remarkable way by those who use it and the thousands of people who operate it. We all need to approach our work on the SDG Agenda 2030 and the protection of human dignity and rights in New Zealand with conviction and humility. To quote Unilever CEO Paul Polson's comment about the challenge facing Unilever, conviction because the need to act cannot be in doubt, and humility because the challenges we face are enormous. So let me return to Ilo Vessel because he tells us what we can do as people and organisations. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. So be on the side of human dignity and rights. Do not be a bystander to bullying, abuse or violence, whether you see it in the home, the school, your work or somewhere else. Do not be a bystander to poverty and unequal realisation of human rights to education, health and an adequate standard of living, including adequate housing, and stand up against racism, sexism, homophobia and ableism. Interfere. Manaki whenua, manaki tangata, kai haere, whakamua. Thank you.
So we have some time for questions for David. Are there any questions or comments people may wish to raise?
So I've got to repeat your question for this. So the question is about, are we doing enough to encourage business to promote and respect human rights? I think the short answer is no. We're bringing some experts, both company experts and NGO experts, out in August to hopefully push that along. It's actually both the government and business. So the UNGPs on business and human rights have three pillars. The government's duty to protect human rights, which includes protecting us from the abuse by companies. The company's responsibility, so not obligation, to protect and promote human rights. And the responsibility of both to give remedy where abuse occurs. In some areas we're really good. I mean, obviously the Human Rights Commission does a lot of work around anti-discrimination. The MB's Employment Authority does a lot of work around labour rights and things. But it's really clear that we're behind most of the EU. The United States is developing a national plan of action for responsible business conduct as well. Our government procurement guidelines do not make it strongly enough clear that government procurement is subject to doing supply chain due diligence. So you should know where your steel comes from that you're putting into your government buildings. You should know where your computer parts come from, and you should understand that really comply with exactly what you would do in California by complying with the Conflict Minerals Act. So but what I would say is that business is ahead of government at the moment in New Zealand in this regard. So we think there are over 200 companies operating in New Zealand, most of them not incorporated in New Zealand, that have already put these principles into their way of doing things. Companies like Fonterra are doing things in some areas, like sustainable palm oil. You've probably heard that they are actually Greenpeace actually thinks they're doing quite a good job now. So there are areas where it's going well as well. But there's definitely more to be done. The main partner in the work we're doing is actually the New Zealand Super Fund, because it's actually realised that many New Zealand issuers of securities would be invested in by funds like them if they just reported on what they actually do. If they don't report, they won't get invested in. So part of what we're doing is a big bit of work for a day with the biggest investment, the biggest investors, the Super Fund, ACC, and people like that in New Zealand capital markets. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So what I was looking for were goals that related to having a democratic government
Yeah.
or a democratic parliament.
So they're all in here. Peace, justice. I'll come back over here. So those goals, the peace, justice, and strong institutions are all about good governance, transparency, and accountability. Democratic institutions, really, and that's that's why I prefer the Commonwealth Games chart in a way, because that actually is the foundation. Goal 16. If you don't get Goal 16 right, pretty well everything else isn't going to be achievable. Yeah, and there was another question.
I was just wondering, so one of the themes that I've heard coming through was your relationship with the government. And I know that the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union, is doing a little bit of thinking about the relationship between NHRIs with national parliaments. And I just wonder if you have any comment on that and your relationship with the New Zealand Parliament and whether you think something needs to change or not.
So there are questions about the relationship between NHRIs and parliaments. We're aware of that work that is going on, and the EU has a plan for democracy and human rights, and item 1 is strengthening national human rights institutions in all countries, and item 2 has a lot to do with the parliamentary and other institutions. I was actually just saying really to Mark before we came in here, when I first came on the job, we reached out to MPs and some of them were very worried about talking to us. And we've broken through that now, that it's entirely okay, even for government MPs, to talk to the Commission to find out what we think and so on. We're also really, this is part of us reaching out, but also we've spoken to the Select Committee Secretariat on human rights. We are working with cross-parliamentary human rights groups in women's rights, in the GLBTI rights, and in human rights, and indeed the Business and Human Rights event, or one of the Business and Human Rights events, will be hosted in the Parliament by the Cross-Parliamentary Human Rights Committee. We, for a long time, had campaigned for a Human Rights Select Committee, but we've changed our position a little bit at the moment. We're saying we understand the argument that's been made about not doing that and trying to get all the select committees more skilled up on understanding the international human rights framework and the domestic framework. And we actually believe if that is possible, if that is actually done, that will probably be better than a separate Human Rights Committee. But if that doesn't work, then we'll go back to campaigning for a Human Rights Committee. I also met last year, I think now, with the chairman of the International Parliamentary Union, and suggested that the International Parliamentary Union and GUNRI, the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, should sign a memorandum of understanding, which sort of sets out the agenda. And there is a thing called the Belgrade Declaration. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. That was also published late last year, which sets out in some detail the expectations around the interaction of NHRIs and parliaments. So that's a growing area. It's an important area for us, and it's probably an area we've underinvested in previous times. Yeah.
Attorney General's reports under the Bill of Rights?
Well, there are things we don't like about. We appreciate that the Attorney General does report. We don't like the fact that the convention is that he can vote against his own report effectively. We do. We do support stronger constitutional consequence if the courts find our laws to be in breach of human rights. That's sort of a little bit implicit in what I was talking about, Article 1.3 of the German Basic Law. I think we would like to see greater protection of human rights in our Bill of Rights, and then we would like that to include some diminution of parliamentary sovereignty. But I don't think even the most optimistic members of the Human Rights Committees I've met think that's going to happen in any common law jurisdiction anytime soon. Yep.
Just to pick up on the comment before around the IPU and so on and reaching out to parliamentarians, I'm interested in, I sit on the Education and Science Select Committee, and the SDGs haven't been mentioned at all.
Yeah.
So I pick up that obviously you've had a conversation with somebody that has suggested we don't need a Human Rights Select Committee, that we're going to spread it across all select committees. And I would go so far as to say that it's not. So is there any possibility that you might be able to push with your relationship with the government to actually get, each one of the SDGs, which transfer into the human rights, can actually be sent to a select committee, and they should be required, they could be required to actually report to the Parliament on them, which would mean they'd each have to investigate them.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that happened in the those references that I read out to how the goals affect the. So we actually put those in the report that we did on the Civil and Political Rights Convention, and we asked the committee to actually, the Human Rights Committee to reference the SDG goals, sort of like you might like a select committee to, and they did. They only did one. Interestingly, it was the first time a UN Human Rights Treaty body had actually picked up an SDG, and it was actually the Gender Equality SDG. They actually asked for the government to provide a concrete plan for how it was going to implement SDG 5. Now, and you're right. Each one of those SDGs does have a place in the Select Committee system.